The end of human civilization begins in total silence, 22,000 miles above the equator in a geosynchronous orbit. A space-based infrared system satellite, known as SBIRS, maintains an unblinking stare on the frozen Eurasian landmass. Its sensors are cryogenically cooled to near absolute zero, isolating thermal signatures against the background radiation of Earth. Deep within the Siberian taiga, a heavy silo cover blasts open, and a Topol-M ICBM ignites its solid fuel stage. The rocket exhaust burns at over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, creating a massive spike of short-wave infrared energy. The SBIRS staring sensor detects the plume instantly, locking onto the intense heat source before the missile clears the silo. This critical data bypasses all human intervention, beaming down to ground stations at the absolute speed of light. In less than 1 second, the signal strikes Buckley Space Force Base in Colorado and relays to Granite Mountain. This is the legendary Cheyenne Mountain Complex, buried beneath 2,000 feet of solid, impenetrable Pikes Peak granite. The facility is a ship in a stone bottle, resting on giant steel springs to survive a direct nuclear hit. Inside, the Missile Warning Center operates within a Faraday cage, shielded against the frying effects of electromagnetic pulse. The screens on the watch floor turn blood red, displaying a launch azimuth and a predicted ballistic arc. Operators here live in a state of permanent paranoia, trained to distinguish a rocket launch from a forest fire. They recall the nightmare of November 1979, when a training tape accidentally simulated a massive Soviet raid. That near-miss rewrote the rulebook, demanding dual-phenomenology confirmation from 2 independent physical systems before escalating to war. As the Russian missile climbs out of the atmosphere, it enters the fan-shaped field of view of ground-based radar. Massive phased-array radars like PAVE PAWS and BMEWS wake up across the northern hemisphere to track the threat. Installations at Thule in Greenland and Fylingdales in the UK begin pulsing the sky with high-frequency energy. These radars blast UHF energy at 420 MHz, capable of tracking an object the size of a grapefruit. The radar return confirms the hard body of the warhead bus separating from the spent booster stage. Supercomputers instantly calculate the trajectory, speed, and crucially, the specific impact point within the continental United States. The physics of the trajectory confirm a ballistic attack, fusing infrared and radar tracks into a single picture. The NORAD commander, a 4-star general, seizes the secure red phone to initiate a threat assessment conference. This 3-way call connects Cheyenne Mountain, the Pentagon's National Military Command Center, and U.S. Strategic Command in Omaha. They have approximately 2 minutes to verify the data before involving the ultimate authority, the president. The clock is the enemy. A submarine-launched missile from the Atlantic could hit Washington, D.C. in 15 minutes. An ICBM from Russia takes roughly 30 minutes, but 5 of those precious minutes are already gone. In the White House, the president is likely asleep, completely unaware that the timeline of the apocalypse has started. The Secret Service waits for the designation launch correlated before bursting into the Oval Office or residence. Once the threat assessment conference confirms the attack is real, the call upgrades to a missile event conference. Now, the civilian leadership enters the loop, and the nuclear football becomes the most important object on Earth. The football is a 45-pound briefcase carried by a military aide who is never far from the president. Inside, there is no red button, but a chaotic menu of destruction known as the Black Book. The aide moves with urgency, briefed by earpiece that the threat is valid and inbound. The president is alerted, adrenaline fighting the mental fog of a sudden, terrifying crisis. He has less than 6 minutes to absorb the briefing, weigh options, and issue a command. If he hesitates, American missiles may be destroyed in their silos before they can ever launch. This is the pressure point of the entire deterrence system. The brutal, use it or lose it dilemma. The STRATCOM commander's voice is calm, reciting the number of inbound warheads and time to impact. He presents the response options: major attack options 1 through 4, or limited attack options. The president must choose: decapitate the Russian leadership, strike their nuclear forces, or destroy their industrial base. He can choose the ride-out option, waiting for impact, a gamble he might not survive to win. As the president reaches for the authentication card, the Secret Service initiates emergency evacuation protocols. The authentication card, nicknamed the Biscuit, is a sealed plastic wafer the size of a credit card. Under immense pressure, the president snaps the plastic casing to reveal the gold codes, a column of alphanumerics. A senior officer in the National Military Command Center issues a 2-letter challenge code from the phonetic alphabet. The president reads the corresponding response code from the Biscuit, confirming his identity to the war room. The Secretary of Defense verifies the order, but legally, he is a witness, not a gatekeeper. The chain of command is short and absolute. The president has sole authority to release nuclear weapons. Once authenticated, the war room generates an emergency action message, a terrifyingly short encoded string. Unlike the luxury of Air Force One, the E-4B is a flying war room designed to fight a nuclear conflict from the stratosphere. The aircraft is a modified Boeing 747-200, but its windows are shielded with heavy wire mesh to block EMP radiation. Its flight deck retains analog instruments because digital glass cockpits are vulnerable to the electromagnetic pulse of a nuclear burst. The skin of the aircraft is hardened against thermal flash, and the avionics are cooled to withstand massive heat loads. At $159,000 per flight hour, it is the most expensive asset in the Air Force inventory. Inside, the National Airborne Operations Center is staffed by a battle crew of 112 officers, analysts, and specialists. They sit at hardened consoles, monitoring the destruction of the world below through encrypted data links. The plane's most critical feature is the trailing wire antenna, a 5-mile-long copper cable spooled out from the tail. This allows the president to transmit very low-frequency signals to ballistic missile submarines submerged deep in the ocean. The E-4B can refuel in midair, theoretically remaining airborne for a week, limited only by the engine oil supply. While the president ascends, the continuity of government plan activates to ensure the state survives the decapitation of Washington. Helicopters swarm the Capitol, extracting the designated survivors from the official line of succession. They are ferried to the Federal Relocation Arc, a ring of hardened bunkers carved into the Appalachian Mountains. The most famous is Site R, the Raven Rock Mountain Complex, located near the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. Built during the Cold War, it is an underground pentagon with 700,000 square feet of floor space blasted out of granite. Raven Rock has its own power plant, 2 massive water reservoirs, and provisions to feed 5,000 people for months. It is designed to withstand a direct hit and the subsequent overpressure of 140 pounds per square inch. Further south, in Virginia, lies Mount Weather, the primary relocation site for the civilian leadership and FEMA. Deep underground, the facility mirrors a small city, complete with dormitories, a hospital, and a police force. The logic is redundancy. Divide the leadership into Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie teams and scatter them geographically. If Washington vanishes in a flash of thermal radiation, the constitutional order reemerges from beneath a mountain. But survival is only half the equation. The American response is already automatic and irrevocable. The emergency action message has reached the launch control centers buried across the Great Plains. These represent the land-based leg of the nuclear triad, 400 Minuteman III missiles in hardened silos. 2 missileers sit in a blast-proof capsule 60 feet underground, breathing recycled air. They verify the alphanumeric code against their own documents. The order is valid. They remove 2 keys from a red lockbox and insert them into switches spaced too far apart for one person. This physical gap is the final fail-safe against a rogue launch by an unstable officer. On the count of 3, they turn the keys, sending a vote to the launch computer. It takes only a few votes from the squadron to initiate the launch sequence for the entire missile field. Above ground, the 110-ton concrete silo door is blown aside by explosive charges. The Minuteman III screams out of the earth, riding a pillar of fire toward the edge of space. Within 60 seconds, the missile reaches hypersonic speeds, clearing the atmosphere in its first stage. Each missile carries up to 3 warheads, housed inside a MIRV, a multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle. In the vacuum of space, the bus maneuvers using tiny thrusters, releasing each warhead on a precise ballistic path. While the land-based missiles are visible and vulnerable, the most lethal leg of the triad remains silent. Thousands of miles away, an Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine receives the emergency action message via very low-frequency radio. These boomers are the ultimate insurance policy, designed to loiter in deep ocean patrol boxes for months. A single submarine carries 20 Trident 2D5 missiles, each capable of carrying up to 8 nuclear warheads. If the president and the entire American continent were vaporized, these submarines possess the firepower to destroy a continent in return. The submarine commander and executive officer follow a 2-man rule similar to the missileers, verifying the launch strings. There is no red button on the sub. The order is executed via a series of mechanical interlocks. The Trident missiles are ejected by high-pressure gas before their first-stage motors ignite, breaking the surface of the water. This is the second strike capability, the cold logic that makes a first strike against the United States suicidal. Simultaneously, the third leg of the triad, the strategic bombers, is already moving toward their fail-safe points. B-52 Stratofortresses and B-2 Spirit stealth bombers are flushed from bases to avoid being caught on the ground. Unlike missiles, bombers can be recalled or redirected mid-flight. providing the president with a final rheostat of escalation. They carry cruise missiles and gravity bombs designed to penetrate deep-buried command bunkers. As these forces converge on their targets, the E-4B Nightwatch is still climbing, seeking safe airspace. The president is now looking at a digital map of a world that is rapidly being reformatted by high-yield physics. From Fort Greely, Alaska, interceptors launch to collide with the incoming warheads using hit-to-kill kinetic energy. But the math of a mass raid is brutal. The defense is easily saturated by the sheer volume of targets. The first detonations occur high in the atmosphere bursts designed to generate a massive electromagnetic pulse. The pulse fries the civilian power grid, telecommunications, and unshielded electronics across the entire country instantly. Only the Doomsday plane and the mountain bunkers remain operational, protected by their specialized copper shielding. In the PEOC bunker under the White House, the hiss of the air seals becomes the only audible sound. The president is now a commander of a ghost nation, directing a war of attrition from 35,000 feet. The goal shifts from deterrence to damage limitation, destroying the enemy's remaining weapons before they can fire again. At Raven Rock, 5,000 personnel activate the post-attack command and control system to monitor the ruin. They track fallout plumes, predicting where the radioactive dust will drift based on upper-level wind patterns. The dining halls begin serving emergency rations. The facility's Hoppenheimer bar remains strictly closed. The air inside is pressurized to prevent hot radioactive particles from leaking in through the blast doors. Communication with the outside world is limited to hardened military channels. The internet is gone. This is the reality of continuity of government. The state survives as a skeletal underground entity. The president's voice, transmitted through the E-4B's VLF wire, is the only thread holding the military together. But the most difficult decision remains whether to initiate a final, total cleansing strike to empty the silos. As the first hour concludes, the American landscape is transformed into a patchwork of thermal scars. The E-4B Nightwatch maintains its orbit, performing post-strike reconnaissance to find functional infrastructure. Far away, the designated survivor begins their tenure in a hardened bunker outside the blast radius. This individual is the fail-safe against the total decapitation of the executive branch during the initial strike. The transition is not a ceremony, but a technical handover of the gold codes and command authority. At Mount Weather, the Bravo team begins the grim task of identifying surviving members of Congress. The FEMA-led high-frequency radio network attempts to contact state governors and local emergency directors. The goal is to establish islands of stability using National Guard units to secure food and medicine. This enduring constitutional government protocol assumes the social contract has been shredded by nuclear fire. In the E-4B, the president faces the terminal decision: ensure no enemy weapons remain to threaten the survivors. The logic is brutal. To ensure the enemy cannot rebuild faster than the United States, they must be leveled. Meanwhile, the Navy's E-6B Mercury continues to circle over the Atlantic as a redundant command node. Without these flying relays, the submarines might act autonomously, a scenario known as the dead hand. Inside Raven Rock, the staff attempts to contact bombers that have landed at secondary, surviving airstrips. The bunkers are stocked with L-band satellite phones that may have survived the initial electromagnetic surge. Life inside is regulated by the survival clock, where every gallon of water is strictly metered. The psychological toll is immense. They are the living who must manage the legacy of a dead world. The Supreme Court justices, relocated to a separate Alpha site, prepare legal rulings on martial law. This ensures that the military's actions remain, at least on paper, within the bounds of the Constitution. As the sun sets on the first day, radioactive fallout begins its slow, deadly migration across the continent. The Doomsday plane prepares for its first mid-air refueling, a delicate dance at 30,000 feet. This fuel is the lifeblood of the presidency. Without it, the commander-in-chief must land in the ash. The ultimate purpose of these systems is to prevent war through the certainty of mutual destruction. Deterrence only works if the enemy believes the United States cannot be decapitated by a surprise blow. It is a Nash equilibrium of the highest stakes. The only winning move is to never play. For 70 years, this architecture of apocalypse has sat in the shadows, maintained by silent professionals. They test the lines, update the codes, and pray the nuclear football remains just a heavy briefcase. The president's survival is about the office, the symbol of a state that refuses to die. Even if the capital is a crater, the National Command Authority remains a ghost signal in the void. The sensors on the SBIRS satellites continue to watch, looking for heat plumes in the darkness below. The missilers in their capsules wait for the end of mission signal, which may never come. This is the infrastructure of the end of the world, a machine built to manage the worst-case scenario. We live in the interwar period, a long pause between the invention of the atom and its final use. Identity confirmed. The order is valid. the state survives.